A lot of times my clients think if they want to buy a song, they just have to pay a publisher and they can buy the rights to a song. And it's true, you can call up a publishing company and buy the rights to, you know, name a song, any song you want. That's fine if you pay the publisher, but you have no recording of that. Paying a publisher does not buy you any recording for that song. It only gives you the right to have somebody stand on camera and sing it, have somebody sit at a piano and play it, do your own recording, or find a recording of that song. So a lot of times, obviously, if a client wants Start Me Up by the Rolling Stones, they want the Rolling Stones singing that song. They don't just want the rights to it and then have your favorite cover band down the street do a version of Start Me Up. They want the Rolling Stones doing it. And they call it most favored nations, which means whoever quotes the highest price between the publisher and the record label, the other party's going to want the same amount. So if the publisher of a song says, I want $150,000, the record label's going to say, well, then you're going to have to pay us the same. And that's a pretty standard, you know, that's a pretty standard procedure. In terms of lawsuits, I think what Jerry's referring to is then what happens is, if we do think we can do our own version of a song, we can hire a young, talented arranger or, you know, a band that can do an interesting cover of a song, and we buy just the publishing rights to a song and hire somebody else to do the recording. You have to be very careful not to in any way infer or copy the sound of that art. Here's another lawsuit example. It's a different one than I talked about this morning, but I think it illustrates the point well. A couple years ago, an advertiser bought the rights to Black Magic Woman. You all know that song by Carlos Santana, made famous? Well, Carlos Santana didn't write that song. A guy named Peter Green, who's one of the original members of Fleetwood Mac, wrote that song. So they bought the rights. They hired an arranger, a music company, to do their own arrangement, complete with a lead electric guitar line of some kind. Well, Carlos Santana took it right to court, and he said, I'm the one that made that song famous. He didn't write the song. He said, I made it famous. And he said he had some sort of creative, intellectual ownership of the way he plays guitar, which is a pretty, you're rolling your eyes. But, and you know, these cases generally don't, a judge doesn't actually come in and say, you know, what happens is it's so embarrassing to the clients and to the ad agencies, to everybody, is that they just yank the spot off the air and they settle, they'll usually settle out of court some way. But I've never been involved in that. I've managed to keep my company, to keep our fingers clean. And you know, it's actually, to be honest with you, one of the reasons I think my job exists at a big company, at a big ad agency, is to have somebody that understands the way music works and understands the business of music. The reason they want me there is to keep them out of these kind of situations, because there have been a lot of lawsuits, and some of them are really interesting. And I'm not sure ultimately if, like the Carlos Santana example, I'm not sure there is any precedent in the law. I'm not a lawyer, but like I say, our clients don't even want to go there, so they just settle out of court and end it all.
Tell me the other example from this morning. That's one that's more like
the spin doctors.
The spin doctors. That's something they get involved in.
Well, the moral of the story there. This goes back to the mid-90s, and I think the reason I cited this example is because what I was trying to explain to people is the one no-no, and the one rule you cannot break is, once you've contacted an artist, once you've asked an artist or a songwriter to participate in a project or to be in an ad or to let their song be used in an ad, if it doesn't work out and you can't afford it, or they decline you for any reason, you can't turn around and create your own music that sounds even remotely like that, because it's called proof of intent. They know that that's what you wanted. They have proof of intent, and that's all they need in a court of law. What happened was Miller Beer contacted the Spin Doctors. You all remember the Spin Doctors? It's like Little Miss, yeah. Miller Beer contacted the Spin Doctors to be in an ad, and Spin Doctors declined. They didn't want to be in the ad. Apparently not that they were necessarily anti-advertising, but they didn't want to do a beer commercial. They were a bar band for years and years and years, and I think the idea of being in a beer commercial was pretty heinous to them. So they turned the whole project down. Miller then, hired an independent, a commercial music company to write a track, and it was just kind of a guitar blues. There was no vocal in it. It's not like they were deliberately copying the Spin Doctors song, but it was close enough. And apparently, they also shot the commercial to kind of look like one of the Spin Doctors music videos. So, but my point is, this would have never gone to court if they hadn't originally tried to get the Spin Doctors in the ad. The Spin Doctors, that's what caused the lawsuit, and it was really bad. It took 2 years, I think, to get resolved. It ended up costing millions of dollars. I mean, they don't actually publicize these things, so it's all kind of word of mouth. But it actually put the ad agency out of business. It was a small ad agency in the Midwest, and that was working on that particular project for Miller, and it was nasty.
What about some examples of up-and-coming artists whose careers have sort of been launched by getting their way into an ad?
Yeah, well, you spoke this morning of Mitsubishi. I think that's probably the greatest example that everybody talks about these days. Like the band Dirty Vegas, you all know that story. Mitsubishi did a whole campaign, probably 8 or 10 spots that were very music-driven. Really wasn't much going on in the ads, except for cool-looking people bopping, while they're driving down the street. And they had some really nice songs, including songs by totally unknown up-and-coming artists like Dirty Vegas. What happened, and the reason it's really become a buzz story in our business, what happened is that nobody had any idea who Dirty Vegas was. Nobody cared up until they did this Mitsubishi ad. And then the website was getting, the Mitsubishi website was getting, thousands of hits. Not people looking to buy a Mitsubishi, but people looking to find out where they could buy the Dirty Vegas album, find out who the name of the band was. So that's one of the things that really turned the attitude around with a lot of record labels. And I'm seeing that. I showed an Old Spice commercial this morning with a new band called the Executioners, and that was definitely a case where they wanted to get this music in this ad because they thought it would be really good exposure for these guys. And they didn't. I'm not saying they didn't charge us anything. There was a fee, but it wasn't a whole lot of money. And a lot of the reason was they really thought this was a good exposure for the band. I don't know if Old Spice has had a lot of inquiries about it, but that's always what the record label hopes for. That's exactly what they're hoping for.
Now, how do you see the future of the industry going, the music and?
Gosh, it's every few years it just changes so much. There's still a lot of people writing good original music for commercials, and there seems to be more and more companies and more young people wanting to do original music for ads. And yet I know there's less and less work for them because we are licensing so much music directly from the labels. I actually had my first example a couple weeks ago where a record label basically came to us and tried to act like tried to fulfill the role of the commercial music house. They said, okay, we got this band and these guys are really ambitious and they really love to work and they do a lot of great stuff. This is what their music sounds like. We don't think they have a song that's exactly right for your ad, but they would like to write something for the ad. So basically there's a record label acting like a commercial music supplier. Now, the track they submitted to me was pretty bad, but that doesn't mean that that's not going to. I see that kind of model happening more and more, where record labels are basically trying to cover all their bases. It's amazing.
Suppose you're an up-and-coming artist in New Orleans, and you have a band in college, and you sort of got the idea that maybe your music would work well in a video. Is there any way that you can get your music heard by somebody like you so that it might stand a chance of getting in?
Well, I get stacks of CDs every day from all kinds of sources. And I have a small department. I have another producer that works with me and 2 assistants. And we try to go, we absolutely try to go through everything. To actually make that, to actually remember a particular piece, and then an ad comes along 6 months later that requires a certain sound or a certain lyric or whatever. I mean, you know, it's really hard to get the perfect matchup to happen, which is why so many of these music supervisors exist. But there's a lot of new. What's interesting to me, and if I were young and starting out and at all interested in this end of the business, what's interesting to me is the people that are coming up with kind of new business models. I'll give you one example. There's a company called Pump Audio. And what Pump Audio has done is they've basically gone to artists of all different kinds, singer-songwriters, great bands, New Orleans bands, electronica guys, hip-hoppers, I mean, they've got every genre of music you can think of, but they're real artists. They've gone to real artists, this isn't, you know, like stock music or commercial music. And they've said, you know, if you have material that didn't get placed on a record, or you have material that's not being used, that's not spoken for, you know, take the vocals out of it, send us the instrumental track. And they put together a database. I have a little hard drive attached to my computer, a Pump Audio hard drive. And it's got 7,000 songs on it, 7,000 pieces of music. And they've set up a great piece of software where I can go in and reference. I can look up by genre, I can look up by tempo, I can look up by mood. I can select all these different criteria, and it'll give me 10 tracks. Now, if one of these tracks, you know, works out, we pay a license fee that's pretty similar. What Pump Audio likes to get is pretty similar to what we generally pay for an original piece of music. A big ad agency like Saatchi pays around, let's say, $20,000, somewhere between 20 and 30. Pump Audio splits that with the artist. So it's kind of a no-lose situation for these artists. I mean, it's like, here, sure, take my material. They don't, you know, they may totally forget that they even gave it to them, but out of nowhere, they're going to get they could get a check for $10,000 for having done the work. I think it's a great, you know, I think it's a great model. And there's a lot of people that are coming up with these. There's some independent music supervisors. There's a woman in New York who calls her company Agoraphone, and she kind of goes out and finds independent bands and a lot of interesting artists and stuff, and says, you know, the same kind of thing. She doesn't work with a hard drive that she gives to people at agencies. She's the focal point. She's the, you know, she does the work. People call her. They pay her a finder's fee, and she goes out and finds a lot of interesting music. But people are coming up with a lot of interesting new models, completely different than how we used to do this work 10 years ago.
Let's talk about careers for a second. How did you get into this business?
Gosh, I went to music school, University of North Texas. It was called North Texas State University back then. And I studied music. I moved to New York just because I wanted to be around the music business in some way, shape, or form. I got a job in a recording studio and learned a little bit of engineering, and got a little burned out on, that's when I worked for Paul Simon, and got a little burned out on working on the same album for, you know, I think I worked on one record at one point for like over a year, working on the same 10 songs. But the recording studio I worked at did about 50% commercials and jingles and about 50% records. So I was exposed to the ad game back then. And those were that was definitely the days when joining an ad agency was selling out. So I sold out big time.